Welcome back to the channel. Today is Coffee Chat with JP, technology evangelist, webcast producer. So we're gonna just chat for a few minutes, do part 2 of the talk about stages and talk about some next considerations. So let's get started. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Glad you have you here. Hope everybody's well and safe. Here's my Hearst coffee. I thought we had just take a few moments today in part 2 talking about stages, and actually the topic today would be getting up to speed, right? And I would say that, getting up to speed right now varies depending on where you're at and what you're doing. So I want to address some things that are going to be common, some that may be familiar already. You may be already in that past that point, that's fine. We're going to have a part 3 that's kind of go a little bit next level up when we talk about more of the professional broadcasting side of things. But not to say that nobody's professional in the scope of who might be watching this video. I think everybody's at different stages. When I came up with stages a couple months ago, I kind of thought of crawling and walking and running stage, right? And that doesn't mean anybody's behind or ahead. It just means where people are at where they're at. A few months ago when the pandemic hit, right, it really kind of propelled a lot of things forward in terms of streaming, online streaming, video on demand playback. We talk about that. Just different elements you would look at from a production. Things that were done normally from a live production had to go to a pre-produced, where you capture the content and then you make that available in some form of a live stream, either through a website or a social media destination. So I just want to take a few moments to talk about some common items to think about. When we talked about the strategy in the last conversation, it was important to kind of think about that because I think the challenge right now that we're seeing is people are looking for the least path of resistance, and I think that's important. There's no doubt about that. But the challenge with it is trying to figure out a strategy that's going to work well to get you going and develop over time so that you can move forward, right? And that's the key. We talked about that in the last video, and I've shared that a couple of times, right? To make our jobs maybe a little bit easier, less complex when we find the right tools to use and leverage, right? And how we deliver that, whether you're a corporation or you're a nonprofit or a church, there are different ways we address these specific areas and the needs that are out there. So I wanted to talk about I think item number 1, or that one, if I were to look in terms of a listing, would be, think about your audio, lighting, video, and network. Now, audio is really important. Just being out here, I have a shotgun mic and I'm doing things a little bit differently, but in-house I might have a mixer that I'm using to produce a video or a live event where I have a mixer that's handling my online audio mix. And I think a lot of times with audio, it becomes very critical because if people hear the ringing, low volume, different elements that can come into play, feedback, right? You want to make sure your audio is crisp and clear. And there are different ways and approaches we can take to that. And I'm going to bring some people from that space that are kind of the audio experts, if you will, those that have experience and been doing it for a period of time and have worked with me, and I've worked with them. And I think they can provide some value in terms of sharing some recommendations. So, having clean audio and having it be crisp is and knowing the types of microphones and the mixer and just different elements you need to manage, I think is critical. And that really impacts the overall experience people have online when they're watching a live event. If any of us have watched an event, it's hard, like video we can kind of put up with, but when it comes to audio and I can't hear the speaker, you start to lose the attention of the audience. So I think it's critical that we make that kind of a priority in terms of the listing. The other area would be lighting. Now lighting is going to vary, right? If I have a stage and I have a screen behind me, and I'm outside, all of these different elements, or I'm at home doing a recording or a live stream, right? Or for some remote location, Lighting is critical too. Being able to visually see the individual speaking or the individuals, making sure if it's a virtual event, you're bringing the speakers online and everybody online can see them when you're doing some kind of type of virtual event. But just in terms of, I'll just use the example of a live event where we're capturing, if I have a screen behind me and the colors are overpowering me and you're paying more attention to the colors, that becomes a bit of a challenge. So again, just like I talked about audio, I'll be bringing somebody in who's done a lot of work on when it comes to screens and lighting and talking about thoughts and ideas you could take and consider and how you could work that through your process. So we've talked about lighting, visually seeing, hearing. Now video. Video is a tough one, right? A lot of people ask the question, they'll ask JP, like, what type of camera should we use inside to do a live stream, or what should we be doing from another type of venue? That's a hard question to answer because it depends on the solution and the need. And so I would really think about it this way. The environment you're in and how you're going to use that camera, there are a lot of choices. Obviously, I'm using a Sony a6500 for this recording, and that's one of my primary cameras, but just for me individually, I'm doing things from a different perspective when it comes to YouTube or doing some of the type of activity. I may have a multi-shoot camera setup where you have multiple cameras, right? 3 cameras. So the center, the left, and the right. I've worked in an environment of production where we had what we call a jib, right? And the jib being, where you see that kind of pan shot from one perspective to kind of pan in and zoom in or pan across. So that might be on a jib, that's an arm that's moving, that might be on a slider, right? There are different elements, and those cameras really depends on the setup that you're going for. If it's traditional, just a live stream, a single camera will work. But if it's on a stage, you've got a head-to-toe shot, right? And you got to think about the type of camera. Well, that could be a DSLR mirrorless camera, or it could be a Blackmagic cinema camera, pocket camera, that they've come out with that's tie into your ATEM Mini little production switcher, or it could be another set of type of capture device. For the home user, if it's a home studio, you can do 1 or 2 cameras, and generally a mirrorless camera will work just fine. But I think going forward, I would think about the camera and the video is an important part because there's the depth of field, it's where the cameras are placed, and different cameras have different experiences. I think the one item that I would point out right now from a live streaming perspective is that a lot of people are trying to go for the 24 frames per second cinematic experience. And so that's okay if you're pre-recording and you're doing something you're going to post online from a playback perspective. But from a live stream, we don't really go by that standard. We go by 30 frames per second. And while it's okay to use certain experience, you want the experience to be, maybe address the audience in a certain way, 30 frames per second is the standard if you're live streaming and you're capturing. Even if I was doing video on demand, I'd still be doing 30 frames per second. And I'm relying on the video team and the audio team to deliver the things that I'm embedding from a capture perspective. So I think it's critical that you just kind of identify the process, but understand that there are standards we go by in terms of live streaming and what we do. So I've talked about video. The other part of it would be your network, right? And networking is critical. So from a networking perspective, I've seen a lot of people using Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is not recommended for live streaming. It's not a safe way of securing your stream. A lot of people have disruptions. Depends on the Wi-Fi network you're on. So generally, you want to hardwire or use an Ethernet cable to connect into a little hub or switch that would give you the ability to have a guaranteed connectivity option. And then the next item that we look at from a networking perspective is the availability of bandwidth on your upload speed. So again, I'll use the illustration of when I'm doing a production. If I was doing a 720p stream or a 1080p stream, I'd be using anywhere from 3.5 megabits for 720, and then for my bit rate, and for 1080, I might be using 4.5 to maybe 5. So the general rule right now is less is more. There are some people it's like, oh, I want to go 8 megabits. you're putting more on your end user when you do that in terms of live streaming, in terms of whether connecting and the connection they have to connect with whether it's, and a majority of people use mobile devices when they're watching online. But so you want to think about your audience because they're connecting, and so if they're locking in at that bit rate, that's going to pull more on their end. So you want to be considerate, but you do want to make sure that you have a decent level of quality and connection. And so my recommendation is look at your network. If you're individual, make sure your ISP or at home you have a decent network set up. For me, I have 30 to 40 megabits. Now that may be more than most people do, but I'm doing some other activities. So I look at the available bandwidth, right? And I'm using my hands here, and I'm looking at those that are on the Wi-Fi network, ensuring that if anybody's online, that's not carving away at my available bandwidth. So having sustained connection and on my network and ensuring that I have the appropriate connection speed, I want to think about ensuring that it's stable and consistent, and that you take the time to invest. And again, if you don't have the expertise, that's okay. Don't worry about it. There are resources online, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you know, think about your network, where you're at, what you're doing, and how things are functioning, right? If you're a church or a nonprofit or corporation, it's going to be the same approach at a much higher level, obviously, because you have a different setup. But in some instances, people haven't invested the resources or the efforts. And from a streaming perspective, it's really important. People go, well, it costs more money, GPU, or there's additional budget I have to put into it. You're right. You're correct. You do. And I wish there was a different way you could make it be easier, but it's just, you got to really be deliberate and think about how your environment is set up. The other area that I talk about is software and hardware. So software and hardware is important. Software is going to be important if you're using software-based encoder solutions, tools that you're going to layer on top, whether you're using a Mac or a PC. Now, there's things like vMix for PC, where you can, it's like OBS. There's Ecamm for Mac, which is like basically me being able to do a live stream or a recording, pull people in from Skype, have scene overlays and things like that. And we're going to talk about that in another session about a how-to, and pull some people in that have kind of got some good experience with Ecamm. But there are solutions out there. StreamYard's another one that's a browser-based solution. You know, you want to think about your software and the type of hardware you're using. And from a hardware-based perspective, that's another process you think about when you're getting started, or if you're getting further along and you want to work more in your efforts. What type of switcher am I using? Is it an ATEM Mini that's very popular right now? Is it the type of camera? We've talked about that. Another area would be hardware-based encoders, right? I talk about software encoders. Hardware-based encoders are similar, but they're an appliance-type device that allows you to pull in your video and your audio, embed that in your stream, and be able to stream that through a media provider or directly to Facebook or YouTube, right? There's different processes that you can go there, and it actually takes the pressure off of using a PC or your Mac, where you can just utilize those as another tool in your production. It's part of your workflow. So for hardware, you know, those are things you're going to think about, like when it comes to what kind of, you know, capture device am I using. Some people use Magewell, Elgato. If you're an individual, real popular right now is the Elgato 60S Plus. It's a great HDMI capture. I can run my camera into that. I can run that into my system, and then I can pull that into an Ecamm or a vMix or an OBS. The other area is to think about is education. Education's really important. I don't know if a lot of people are doing enough. I think I say this to myself all the time. I need to spend the time to do the research and educate and get up to speed. I don't like to go into anything unless I know exactly how things are working, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It's been a part of the consideration, but education's critical. Understanding how your software works, how the hardware works, and getting up to speed if your vendors, remember your technology partners, provide an option for training that you can get involved with, and an opportunity to learn. Do they have resources available? Are there videos? Are there different online elements you can leverage? So I really make the recommendations to everybody: get educated, right? And also not only get educated about your software and hardware and those areas of your technology and equipment that you're using, get up to speed on the industry. And I think From an individual, I'm going to touch on this in the education component. Livestreamingpros.com is the website, but Livestreaming Pros, they have done a phenomenal job in putting together resources for the individual who needs to set up a studio. You want to do live streaming, you want to get into that space. They do consulting to come in and set up studios. I'd highly recommend, if you're looking for help, they have a special, I think, going on right now, and they've produced guides and resources and training videos. They're on YouTube. They've done a fantastic job. So I highly recommend them, and full disclosure, I do use their service, but I did it also for myself, like, okay, what's going on? When this pandemic hit, it really changed a lot of, getting up to speed. What would people need to look at? And I came at it from the approach of, I have experience in terms of what I've been doing, but there may be things that you need to do. So education's important. Another item, test and validation, right? Look at testing your environment and validating the setup you have. Making sure testing is another element you want to consider, and validating how it works before you go live or for playback or capture. Another area would be your community. Think about your community options. Is there a community you can tap into? There are plenty there online. Livestreamingpros.com, I just talked about their resources. But for your team, it's important. Even training, even individually, outside of your individually, I would say for a team, education and the research and the efforts that are needed are really critical to test and validate. So I would think about testing and validating your setup when you can say you get everything going. Think about those resources you're going to have to pull together and do that. Lastly, I would talk about from a production and workflow perspective is just work on your workflow and production. Make sure your team is able to start ready to go, and just consider those areas that you need to develop and mature. So as you work through that, think about how your team is set up. What type of resources do you have in-house, outside? Do you have the people? Do you need to bring somebody outside to do a virtual event? There are a lot of different options. So I think that is an important element that we've got to consider and look at. And think about, if I don't have the resources, where do I go? And so if you have a question, let me know. You can leave a comment, let me know. I'm happy to connect with you. I'm happy to even connect with other people. If you have a virtual event or you have some activity, feel free to ask and present that. And leave your comments, lastly, where you're at. What are you doing? How are things working for you? A lot has changed. There's a lot of efforts underway. It'd be great to hear your thoughts and see how things are going. So, in closing, thank you. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll talk again soon.